Hello and good evening. So, we are these days pretty much hearing about a lot of things about a white substance. This white substance is something that we are introduced to right from birth. It is a fine powder and the first taste that you develop. I'm talking of no thing other than sugar, sweet. For my Hindi viewers, I would say chini. The debate, the point in question is a big one. And as of now, it has been considered that sugars are most harmful. There's a propagation that synthetic sugars are harmful. The ones that you get as sugar crystals are harmful. And there are a number of other things that you get to hear. The point that I would want to state, and that comes from my stream of medicine, Ayurveda, regarding this being harmful or not harmful, is rather an old saying which simply says how much is good and how much is bad is something that is to be defined and is defined at different ages, at different places, and for different purposes. Which means a qualified use of sugar is not harmful in the first place. But then, is sugar alone the sugar that we talk about medically, or is it just one of it and there are other sugars as well? There are, and there are one too many. The dietary sources, the dietary proportions of sugar that we draw from other sources of food, particularly carbohydrates and some fats, is very, very high. One of these is two of the world's commonest vegetarian foods, rice and potato. But both are very, very prominently used, very, very widely used across the world. It is not limited to any particular geography or any particular way. There are societies which eat meat along with potatoes. There is a world where potato is a staple, and in history, it has caused revolutions. And despite considering the present world, sugars being very harmful, sugars being very dangerous, yet potato and rice remain irreplaceable in a large section of society for a large section of the population all around the world. Before I talk whether it is good or bad, we will have to understand, and I'll come from the Ayurvedic perspective, as to what happens to these forms of sugars when you eat them, when they go into your body, and what results. There's a concept of a substrate being formed after digestion, and that is not limited to Ayurveda alone, it is considered by all systems of medicine. Ayurveda, what it has done is it has tried to label anything edible in terms of the aftertaste that it is supposed to bring. So the labeling is in terms of a name that you can easily familiarize yourself with, and that is a kind of taste. So when it comes to sugar, it is supposed to be sweet. Other forms of sugars don't necessarily end up being sweet. They might end up being bitter, they might end up being astringent, but largely sweet. The bitterness, the astringents will depend upon their chemical constitution, whether they are more protein rich, whether they are rich with oils, essential oils, or they are massively carbohydrate rich as white rice generally is, which forms the largest proportion of consumption. What next? The next is after digestion, that is what happens to it in the stomach. It gets absorbed into the system, and where it goes, where it resides, where it is placed, the effect that it has at that particular place, particularly ends up giving it a secondary taste, or that taste which is after a metabolism that is not discussed in Ayurveda openly or as discreetly as modern medicine has looked at. Because in Ayurveda, there are no metabolic chains, no metabolic cycles that have been elaborated. It is a very straightforward description that this is the thing, this will end up being this. Does not discuss broadly much the same as modern medicine as to how it is going to break down. Given that it is not going to do so, you have the next thing to do to understand what is happening where. And in that parlance, the quantity of the sugar derived post digestion, if it is, say, in liver, where it does not get really utilized much, it by nature of sweet also carries a very strong parthiv character and a very strong jalaj character or a hydrated character. Together they form a binding, and that bound substrate further turns into fat. Even if you look at the uh, chain of lipogenesis from glucose, it is the transformation, it is the esterification that takes place in the liver. This transformation, this esterification also has to do with a stressed out liver. In the stressed out liver, which is still not diseased, but it is overworked, what is it is doing is converting this sugar to fat and slow, or rather not exactly fat, but a intermediary state as glycogen. And further, if it cannot store it as glycogen, then it is converted to fat and stored in the liver. What this storage does is it obliterates a lot of liver spaces. It naturally overtakes a lot of active part of the liver, reduces its efficiency, increases the stress upon it, and the multiplication is what translates into what we term as fatty liver. Now, this is the most layman, common man example or method that I can employ to explain how fatty liver develops. That does not mean that this is the right metabolic method. This is just a crude way to explain to somebody who does not understand biology, or who does not understand the metabolic elements, but has to be made aware of how fatty liver comes into being. Similarly, at the tissue level, the extra glucose that is there and not being utilized by the tissues ends up forming a low oxygen proportion, leading to anoxygenic metabolism resulting in acids. And acids cause trauma. The local trauma that they cause is a trigger for the immune system to fight, causes inflammatory conditions. Some of these inflammatory conditions result into recurrent cycles, and if those recurrent cycles take shape, depending on where and what involvement of the immune system it is, it can turn into an autoimmune condition or an inflammatory condition leading to damage, paralysis of metabolic functions or functions of that particular organ, and in due course can become a challenge, whether it is of physical debility or even it can cause a serious damage to health, leading up to a risk to life. Given this, the understanding that carbohydrate is not the only thing that has to be staved off, because again it is the immediate source of energy and it is needed by the body. It is important to understand how much should you eat, and we cannot really quantify as per the way the diet charts or nutritionists would want to describe it. Different geographies, different bodies, different professions, different races, different gender, all come together to have different energy needs. And consequently, something has to be done immediately and something over a period of time. So, putting everybody in the same bracket as this much of carbohydrate and this much of sugar and this much of something is not going to be the right approach. As a Prakriti analyst working almost close to 20 years on these zones, what I have realized is better than quantifying, it is to qualify how to consume any particular thing. Because end of the day, any person will only eat from amongst carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. There's no fourth substance that he's going to consume from. So, managing the anaerobic conditions, managing the state in the liver where carbohydrate remains unutilized, only signifies the volume that it needs to be consumed in. The ideal method would be to consume carbohydrate in the most as easily assimilable and quickly utilizable forms, not along with additional carbonation or additional uh, taste to it, but in more palatable liquid forms or easily, quickly digestible liquid forms. The more solid the meal, the more proteinous it becomes, is better. How much of carbohydrate do you use depends on how much of a physical activity are you involved with. Till quite a few years ago, I remember when I was to start with medical school in those years, childhood obesity was not a concern because children by then used to be very, very active. But going back 25 years, I can say that childhood obesity has become a huge concern, and childhood obesity remains a point which is still debated. And in the post COVID world, it has drawn many, many more essential thoughts because the life has grown sedentary and sedentary and sedentary. It is very much recognized that if you're an athlete, if you are physically active, you need sugars immediately, which simply means that anybody who is taking sugars should be physically active. If you're not active physically, you should be consuming sugars less. Even in Ayurveda, diabetics have been termed as Raj Rogi, meaning uh, such patients who have a sedentary lifestyle. This established gives us a hint at another facet that, be it fatty liver, or be it diabetes, or be it any autoimmune induction resulting out of carbohydrate metabolic influence, they all are reversible. Their timelines can be different depending on the nature of the whole incidents, but more effectively and more importantly, it is that the control of consumption of food exists. In this context, one of the most common practices that has been advised in Ayurveda and is also a treatment model, is vrat, of fasting. These days, we see different forms of fasting having evolved, more like an attempt at conditioning and conditionalizing fasting. Broadly, fasting is fasting, and it has to only appropriate the need of liquid in your body. Otherwise, other than liquid, if you're fasting, you're not taking food, you're not supposed to take food, any kind of food. Not that can take some fruits or some nuts. There's no control over it then. You are augmenting the possibility of the body developing sugar alternately. So, while sugar is an elixir and is a lifesaver, it is the first taste that you need and develop as a child, right from the minute zero when you're born, in the form of colostrum, that is the first feed you get, to the end of the day when you are not surviving and maybe you're in a hospital and you're on a drip. Sugar essentially is a part of your life and you cannot do away with it, but necessarily you can quantify it, and along with quantification, qualify it. Your quantification is based on your qualification, and your qualification is based on how active, how agile, how mobile, how physical your activities are through the day. Still, if you have questions, if you want to discuss, if you want to make it a diabetes reversal thing, if you want to make it a fatty liver reversal thing, if you want to make it a autoimmune disease management thing, and consider that Ayurveda can help, you can come to me. Rest assured, I would be conditionalizing it in the first place. I would really want to analyze how much your body needs in terms of sugar. Once that is done, is when I propose to you how it can be done. And I will handhold you over a distance till you make it a habit, till you have accustomed yourself to a lifestyle, and thereafter lead you on to the road that is best for you. I will never say that how long you can live. I will never say how well you can live. But I can always say you will live healthy, you will live happily, and above all, you will live with a smile. Thank you.